All right, so I guess I kind of just want to have a basic contention to make about the way that we, the very confusing way that we use a lot of terms. Like, we have progressive liberals, and then we have conservative liberals, and in the United States, that's what we have, and nothing more. And we try to imagine that the conservative liberals are in one party, and the progressive liberals are in the other party. But the truth is, they're kind of even mixed up between the two. And so we have this language, which is very, very obscurantist. So, when we say the left, and then we talk about the how much of the left are just libs or whatever, when we say the libs, what we're talking about is this notion that we can prioritize the progressive wing of the formal representatives of capital. And we can prioritize that section out of some kind of like vague hopes for like either harm reduction or even just, I don't know, something even further looking somehow. I recognize that when we say stuff like the way that the libs are, and we rarely ever talk about conservatives, it makes it seem lopsided and fairly confusing. So in the future, I would like to find a better way to talk about this, but I'm not really quite sure how, because we can't just use terms the way that they actually are intended to be often. Like, if in this country, if you say liberal, you mean the left, and then if you say the left, you mean whatever. You at least it seems though you intend it to mean something more than just liberal. So these terms are conflated all the time. And also, when we say things like neither left nor right is really just right, or else the truth lies somewhere in the middle, or I'm a moderate, or whatever. These are all examples of how extremely confused we are. I don't know. I guess it's just a disclaimer that confusion abounds, and in as much as we're trying to clarify, I think we should also just admit that we don't quite have the right terms that would aid us in that clarification yet.
Hello, and welcome to the Regrettable Century. It's Chris and Jason. Everyone else is losers. They're not here right now. So we're going to talk today about the general state of the left and what it actually means to be part of the left.
If it means anything at all.
Yeah, if it means anything at all. So this is real grouchy old man hours here, probably. A lot of you are going to say, or this has been said of us before, oh, they sound like grouchy millennial X-trots. And it's like, well, damn, that's... Since we say that we're grouchy millennial X-trots on the podcast, that's a really astute observation.
We've been saying that more or less, I don't know, every episode for like almost 6 years. 6 years,
yeah. So yeah, good eye or ear, I guess, because you don't watch our podcast.
So one thing about this topic is I find that we're not alone, like at all, in terms of people of our generation and maybe a little bit older trying to do an accounting of the previous, 2 decades.
Right. And then it's funny because you have like Gen Xers who are still involved in the left. They sort of feel the same way. And most of them have pretty much tuned out. Yeah. A lot of millennials have like this real melancholy, God, I wasted so much of my time on bullshit activism kind of outlook of the past 20 years. And then you got boomers, if they're still political at all, just overflowing with optimism for some fucking reason.
Yeah, I've noticed that there are a lot of people who are like 60 plus who are like very enthusiastic about the young people finally being around, but like I'm not. Yeah, well, it's not clear what precisely it is that they are actually coming around. And also, when I talk to younger, I still know a few younger people, and they don't seem to have any similar frame of reference to me. Like I talk about things, and they don't. It's like I'm talking past them. Like we're talking about something entirely different.
Yeah, absolutely. And like whenever I hear people say, "Oh, but the kids these days are so progressive," I'm like, "Okay, cool. So they're all joining their unions and organizing their workplaces, and they all have like a advanced class consciousness." Is like, no, but they post TikTok dances about how trans rights are good,
Yeah, that actually is.
Which, yeah, sure they are, whatever. But like, is that like being part of the left?
Yeah, that's my first question that I wrote down. It's just like, what do we mean by the left? And
Right.
similarly,
What do we
mean by
left?
liberalism too?
Right. Because if your concept of the left is just to be more liberal, then neither category means anything anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think what I find is that neither category means anything, regardless of what people want to believe when they say, oh, the difference between leftists and liberals. And those tend to be a matter of degrees of adherence to social values. Like liberals think this thing, and then leftists, which is a category I'd never really liked anyways, leftists think this thing, but are more serious about it.
Right.
And that's just
if you really wanted to give like a hard and fast rule, it would be like liberals are pro-capitalist and leftists are anti-capitalist. But then like, what does that mean? Does that mean that leftists are all for organizing a communist party and seizing the means of production? Or does it mean something else?
Well, it further complicates things whenever what we call liberals are really just one of the factions that make up liberalism, because the other liberals are conservatives. So we utilize this very unclear, imprecise language for this thing, which we are then imprecise and unclear about when we compare ourselves to it. So not only is there a difference between liberals and leftists in people's minds, but also between liberals and conservatives. And I would like to contend that there's no difference between any of the three, not in any substantial way.
Liberals, conservatives, and then leftists?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's just three variations of essentially, and this is not I'm not calling anybody out, but there's one project, and it's just about how tolerant and nice it can be made, or it can be made to not be. But this idea that there's a distinct positioning of, I don't know, whatever. If one could position oneself on this primary social question about, like, the question of labor and of capital, I'm not really sure that there is a left.
Right. Like I know several liberals who are more militantly pro-labor than most leftists I know.
Yeah.
Because most leftists I know are pretty much just morally to the left. Like to them, being part of the left is a moral obligation, right? Like they think that it is mean and bad to be mean to people. And so in order to not be mean to people, I should be on the left.
Yeah. I mean, I know some people who call themselves Marxists who are like consciously opposed to the concept of organized labor. And then I also know some people who are like traditionalist Catholics who would like vote Republican, and they're also militantly and unapologetically pro-labor. So
like our uncle.
Yeah. And it's not just him, it's also that category of person I encounter kind of often.
Yeah.
And that dichotomy means that in as much as I think some fealty to and commitment to and dedication to helping, cohere a better understanding of the ways in which the working class can self-mobilize and self-defend and engage in self-defense. Just judging from my own experience over the last, 3 to 5 years, I feel like it's easier to conclude that I should go talk to some conservative Catholics and ignore the socialists who march around the street and say, we don't like the things happening, but also we don't like fucking unions.
I don't know how many socialists. I haven't met a lot of socialists that don't like unions. I've met a lot of socialists who are uninterested in organizing unions because it's like a hard, real work and not just like posting on the internet and going to a meeting and going to a support group once a week with your friends who think exactly the same as you do. But like, I know a lot of anarchists who are like really anti-union because it's just
and they're leftists or whatever too.
Sure. Anarchists are the least leftist of any leftists because they're the most individualist and the most susceptible to just being like, oh, well, we got to, mitigate the harm here. And, they're the ones that are most into language policing and consumer politics and stuff like that. So that, to me, American anarchism specifically, and not like so-called class struggle anarchism, but like this lifestylist based sort of anarchism that has been popular since the 90s in the United States is definitely just a flavor of liberalism.
That's what we used to call anarcho-liberalism.
Right. It can't even be mistaken for leftism at all.
So, and then another thing about this is that I find that when I talk to younger adults who are like, whatever, on the left, they have a different understanding of what all this stuff even means. And I don't just mean the definitions. I mean, like, I will make references to things which haven't existed for so long that, we talk about like street protests and paper sales and whatever, like the things which defined a lot of the protest culture of our own youth.
Yeah.
Those are not nearly as common today. And really, I don't exactly know I don't know what to think about that. I don't know how to account for that.
Well, the frequency that we protested was just absurd.
Well, that's also true.
Yeah. I mean, like in the ISO, it was like you're supposed to turn every tabling or paper sale into a mini protest. So we'd protest with 5 people against whatever shit, that week on the square of our small college town and just be ignored by like most people. I don't know. It was an exercise in futility. It was just, God, I wish I could get back all the time that I wasted doing paper sales for the ISO.
Could think of a lot of things I would have rather have done. Like things that, even just things that we did do.
Right.
And how much better served those meaningful projects might have been if that time and energy was only directed towards those things rather than to those mini tablings or those mini demonstrations.
But at the same time, like, at least we were going face to face with people, and talking to people. Like, the entire outlook was wrong. Like, the way that we were oriented towards getting other college students to join our college student-based organization, like we were a campus club,
Right.
And that was the extent of our recruitment efforts. Like, that was wrong, but not necessarily the idea of going out into the public and like making contacts and having conversations. I just don't think that holding up a big newspaper that says, socialist worker on it was really the right way to approach those making those contacts.
No, in fact, if I was a college student now, I would still be a member of the state employees union, and I would still be an activist within the union. I'd still be recruiting for the union.
Yeah,
but that would be what I did, and my socialist gathering would be a kind of a meeting of the minds, the brain trust, whatever, for that as the project, not a project of my own. It would be the project of the group.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the worthwhile project rather than just tailing liberal cause celebs,
Well, right. Like, because that is one of the many things that made and does make the left just a variation of what we call liberalism, as opposed to a distinct thing. Yeah. So this article in Sublation Media, I forget where this comes from, but it's Sarah Wagenknecht, who is in Germany, and she split from Die Linke, right? Yeah, and she's regarded as a red brown whatever. And I don't really have much to say about the distinctions and the developments in Germany. I don't really know much about it. I guess without having qualifications or inside knowledge of the way that the social movements and the working class in Germany is being reformatted and the struggles internal to that moment, I guess I will just say that I like this notion, this characterization that to whatever extent we're talking about the left, it's what we can say the left wing of capitalist politics. And also, it wasn't Sarah Wagenknecht. It was Jyoti Brar, which I don't know anything about at all.
Oh.
I'm assuming because this person is a deputy leader of the Workers' Party of Britain, which is George Galloway's project. This is another red-brown figure, or another figure that you're not supposed to champion.
somewhat, yeah, they've definitely been painted as red-brown by other people. I know that, I guess that Galloway specifically is pretty socially conservative on certain things. So that's what makes people call him red-brown, even though he's a pretty typical ML from what I remember. But
right. And so if I agree with Galloway or Wagenknecht or Brar about this one particular question, I don't want that to imply that I endorse and am cheerleading this complex social questions from other countries on the other side of the ocean. I just want to say I think that this characterization of what we call the left today in our country is spot on. It is the left wing of capital.
Yeah. And because we mentioned Sarah Wagenknecht, she did, I think, at some point criticize some refugees for sexually assaulting German people, saying that they had lost the right to hospitality. So basically, I don't know if she was advocating deporting all of those refugees or just the ones that had committed the sexual assaults. But that basically got her painted as being anti-immigration when she said that, which maybe she said other stuff that's anti-immigration, but that's the only thing that I remember being brought up. But she was praised by the AFD for saying that, so that doesn't put her in very good company.
No.
Yeah.
Well, right. And so, like, to the extent that there is more to say about that, I don't know. But I will say this, though, is that it's our fault if we have to find some rational, sane kind of sound bites in corners that we otherwise wouldn't have anything to do with. It's like this notion that left politics is anathema to class politics and to Marxism. And I think that's right. I don't like it. I don't think it should be that way. But in the past, even in recent episodes, I've said things like, I don't know if I want to be associated with the left. I think I even have said, I don't know if I like being known as Marxist. That's not a reflection on how I see the world. That's a reflection on how I see other people seeing the world.
Right. Other people who identify as Marxists and as leftists just basically share nothing in common with you.
Right.
Which, yeah, I mean, and that's part of the way that definitions change. They shift as the political landscape shifts. So, it used to be that a Marxist was somebody who was, unabashedly pro-labor and generally attached to a party that advocated for communism, right?
Right.
And now because the door has been thrown open to pretty much anybody who, because you don't have to have party affiliation to be considered something anymore. So you could be a Marxist without being a member of a party. And of course you always could have, but in the past, it really meant something to be a Marxist. And it's like you claim to be a Marxist if you were willing to be ostracized from your community in order to fight for the working class, right?
Well, and also critically, if you were willing to subordinate your essentialism, your essence, underneath the authority of or the primacy of what's called the class struggle.
Yeah. And
I know that sounds like a weird thing to speak of in a celebratory way, especially from me as a person with no, there's nothing about me that you could visibly say, that's a person who maybe does something. I don't like that person, that kind of person, whatever.
Yeah.
So since I can't speak for an oppressed minority, which is a real thing, I'm not saying this tongue in cheek. Since I can't speak for an oppressed minority, it sounds weird to say things like subordinate your identity to the class struggle. That sounds like a thing that I'm even uncomfortable with it. And yet, that at one point that was the norm. It was understood that without the emancipation of labor, there is no other emancipation.
Right. Right. I mean, and that's what we've always said. It's like the idea of winning equality, formal equality for people in the United States doesn't mean anything unless you win repeal of right to work laws, right?
Right.
Stuff like that. Because like if you can be fired from your job for any reason and no one has to give a reason, then you could be fired for being trans if you clock in late one day. Or you could be fired for being...
Even if you legally cannot be fired for being trans or for your sexual identity or your racial identity or whatever.
Right, because you can be fired for no reason.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which means that you are as unfree as you were before. Except for that now you have a much nicer veneer.
Right.
That nominally you should see through.
And since the Democrats have gone all in on pretending to give a shit about gay rights and trans rights and stuff like that, they've set themselves up as what seems to be the only viable thing to do. They set themselves up so that voting for them seems to be the only viable thing to do. So like I have leftist friends of mine that are like, look, I hate the Democrats as much as I hate Trump, but I'm going to vote for him because of Roe v. Wade and trans rights, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, yeah, but what about what's going on in Gaza? And they're like, well, it'll just be worse if the Republicans are elected. I'm like, I don't see how it could possibly be worse, but it will probably be as bad.
It might be as bad.
Yeah.
It's really difficult to imagine it being worse. And more importantly, if we have to understand our agency as is only concentrated in this one action, this signing of a ballot.
Right.
Even if we recognize that, if we're not willing to say, well, you fucked up too bad, so you have to go away, I'm not going to support you anymore. If we can't even do that, then that support doesn't mean anything at all.
Right.
It matters in exactly no way.
None at all. Yeah. I mean, and so what I've always said is, sure, vote for whoever you want. That's fine. It doesn't matter. It's not politics, right? It's not real politics. Politics is about achieving and exercising power.
Right.
And so voting in the United States is neither of those things. The act of voting doesn't give you any power. It doesn't exercise any control over your elected officials. It's seriously, it's just it's like palliative care for our democracy, right? It makes you feel okay while the world burns down around you.
Right. And to the extent that this social order can be made more tolerable, yeah, I think you should probably do that. But to mistake that, to substitute that project for what I think is, it's elemental, this very essential thing that we have to do, which is fundamentally just the emancipation of labor. If that's not the overriding concern, and if that's not the concern, then being on the left is the left wing of capital.
Yeah.
You're making the rule of capital a little bit more tolerable for some people sometimes.
Yeah. So this is sort of what we've always said about, the politics of identity, is that individual oppressions matter a lot. Obviously, yes, they certainly do. But from the position that we're in right now, tackling individual oppressions as though they're separate from class oppression it's a losing game. We have basically no power to change things, and in as much as things are changed, it's gifts from above. And then oppressed minorities often see themselves as beholden to the class that gave them these gifts from above, and ends up tying constituencies to the Democratic Party, who is committing a genocide.
It seems as though we should want no condescending saviors to rule us from a judgment hall.
I'm against that. But so if I'm trying to be diplomatic about this, but
yeah, it's hard because it's hard to figure out the right way to talk about this without opening the door to the other petulant, awful, obnoxious haters.
Right. But identity is inherently conservative because it's bequeathed to you. It's just a matter of how you were born. If the politics of emancipation are tied to the identity into which you were born. And no one can really tell you anything about your own emancipation unless they are also part of that identity. That right there is just the further atomization of what should be a united class seeking its own self-emancipation, which doesn't mean that like we shouldn't in our organizations take care to like make sure that people of color aren't being like overwhelmed by dominant demographics who have had more opportunities than them. Yeah, sure, obviously. But
well, okay, to put it
figure out a way to make your organizations more appealing in fighting for class power.
Well, yeah, to put it in the framework that makes sense to the old communist era, the old Communist Party's understanding of things is that racial chauvinism is a way to divide the class. Right. That's why it's bad.
And racial essentialization is just the reverse side of the racial chauvinism coin, you know? So like when liberals laud oppressed groups as being somehow more virtuous than white people, that's racial essentialism. And it's like just further divides the working class. So it's like, yeah, sure, oppressed people deserve to have their voices lifted up or whatever, right? But like to do what liberals do, and a lot of leftists do this. In fact, I would say probably a majority of leftists will do this. They'll act like, oh, well, being gay is like inherently better than being straight, or being trans is better than being cis, or, you know, somehow being a person of color is better than being a white person. And that's how you get people like Rachel Dolezal or this fake Native American guy that just got busted in Portland. It's not a helpful category. I mean, it's not a helpful categorization, and I think it's harmful more than it is helpful, more than it's just not helpful. And it just entrenches the politics of race as they've been set up by the capitalist class in order to divide people.
Yeah, I mean, this, well, for lack of a better term, I'm going to keep calling it the left moralism, this Puritanism.
Yeah.
Yes, it's only a way to divide the class further. But it's also, since it has very fully taken center stage, I think for the last, 5 years, hell, almost 6 years now, what we have done as a podcast is muse aloud and talk to people about who are doing different things, and all in our own time, and never talk about these things on the podcast. But our project has been to essentially try to mount a salvage operation to kind of rescue whatever there is to rescue of this thing which we're calling the left for the purposes of class politics. And I think, I don't know, I guess at this point I'm prepared to just like, okay, fine, you can have all of that. I'm going to talk to somebody else about how to do class politics and to try to find a way to do that, whether that person is, of the left or not.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and, that's what the old communists would have done. The old communists wouldn't have been trying to find the radicalizing minority among the most advanced liberals, right? It's communists, the goal of the communist is to reveal to the working class what its own aspirations are.
And actually, nothing more at all, actually.
Yeah.
And literally, the communists have no aims apart from the movement as a whole. They're merely the ones who can see the furthest and have the most clarified vision. The whole purpose of Marxism is to render the world more intelligible for the purposes of laying your hands upon the machinery and redirecting it, reformatting it, reconstructing it. And that's it. Everything else flows downstream from that.
Right. Right. So I wouldn't call us class reductionists, but I'd definitely say that we have a class-first politics. Like, not everything can be boiled down to class. But I think that, if we're going to rank the things that communists should care most about, class would have to be at the very top. And good news for everyone who might think that this sounds like we don't care about people of color or trans people or whatever. But most people of color and most trans people are working class.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you don't have to worry about that. We do care about trans people and people of color because they are also of the working class. And in as much as they're not of the working class, I care about them as people. I don't want bad things to happen to them, et cetera, et cetera. Things that a good Christian would say, right? But as far as class interests are concerned, my interests are those of the working class, the oppressed classes, those who create the wealth and make it so that there is a possibility of creating a better world one day, if there still is.
Spoken like the principal white supremacist, Adolf Reed.
I love how he gets called a white supremacist as like a lifelong fighter for workers' rights and, black civil rights and a black man.
I was going to say, there is such a concept of a black white supremacist, but
there is
that joke. I feel like people aren't even going to understand what I mean unless they're 40.
We can play Nazi. We can play Nazikin in the Voodoo Glow Skull song about Mexican Nazis. Have that as the outro music.
Yeah, that's. Do you remember when that was the thing that you had to like make sense of? You had to talk about. It's really weird.
There's a Nazi lowrider gang in California from the 90s. They're like Cholo Nazis. It's a real thing. Look it up.
Yeah, the 90s were a wild time.
Yeah. Honestly, like everyone calls everybody Nazis now, and there are probably fewer Nazis now than there ever were in the 90s.
Yeah.
When there were like large, well-organized gangs of Nazis and then militiamen and then all different kinds of neo-fascist skinheads.
Well, like during when the Turner Diaries came out, when the Oklahoma City bombing happened, whenever Ruby Ridge had the shooting at Ruby Ridge, there were actually events which mattered that you understood who the Nazis were and who they weren't. And really, since 2016, since Donald Trump's election, everybody's much more concerned about Nazis, despite there being far fewer of them than there were even 5 years ago.
The problem, what happened is people believe that everything you see on Twitter is like a reflection of what the world around you is like at all times, So, I've definitely fallen prey to this as well. Like the most annoying liberals that you've ever met are as overrepresented on Twitter as were, the alt-right trolls that had Zyklon B SS Adolf Hitler penis in their as their Twitter titles or whatever. It was always something vulgar along with I remember Nazi rapist was one of them that people used to post. Look at what this person is saying. I was like, I would advise you not to pay attention to what that person is saying because they're clearly not trying to win hearts and minds. But
if there was a guy who was like Nazi rapist at a rally and he was giving a speech that was like that, those Twitter threads, but in a written form and given as a speech, that guy's audience would be a 0.
Well, that's what happened. The alt-right had a big mask off moment at Charlottesville, and it was too hard to pretend like these people that had been fighting the good fight for Trump on the internet and like fighting the meme war, which was super important to people back then, fighting the meme war on the internet, that like it was too hard to pretend like they weren't outright neo-Nazis. So, once they were like cockroaches, once the light was shined on them, they scurried away and then the alt-right just dissolved.
Yeah, like that phenomenon kind of disappeared within that first year.
Yeah, it's because that's all it was an online phenomenon that like once they all got around each other in real life, they hated each other and there was all kinds of infighting and all of even the organized groups that met in person, they all devolved into squabbling micro factions that dissolved too. Pretty much the only one that really stood the test of time was the Proud Boys. And they have, ever since January 7th and all of their top leadership being arrested for storming the Capitol, they've disappeared too.
Yeah, it's funny because we usually think of this phenomenon as an affliction that only infects our circles. When you think of like what has happened to I don't know, the DSA or all the various kind of communist whatever groups in the
ISO and like Socialist Alternative too. They're splitting right now also again.
Yeah, and over really
for the third time since 2016, I think.
Yeah, and really for similar reasons. It's because in both cases, we're really not talking about a genuine independence. We're talking about maybe aspiring independence, but no, there's no genuine independence from the only social base that can be commanded by, what's a better way to put this? No genuine independence from the primary structures of the maintenance and the administration of capital. Because, whenever we talk about like trying to find the radicalizing minority of liberals has only helped to make socialism more liberal.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's true. I also just think saying terms like radicalizing minority just doesn't, that's a term that doesn't make any sense to somebody if they're 29,
Yeah.
And so I'm happy for all of you, by the way. All the listeners who don't know what the hell we're talking about when we say things about this very archaic version of the kind of activist culture of the former left.
Yeah.
It's great that you don't know what it is. But I'd still feel really sad for you that you don't know anything better either.
Yeah, it's not like, we were on this podcast happy about the death of the microsect.
Yeah, I remember that.
And, it needed to die. But it turns out that was a bit too optimistic because now we're dealing with nanosects of like, I guess the ISO broke up into a few different, like even smaller nanosects that organize around a publication here or there.
What I would say now about the death of the microsect is that they're coming to get you, Barbara.
Yeah.
Because, yes, it's dead, this concept of the microsect, but it's not like any less an affliction. It's just an undead version of what we had before.
Right. It's the farce of the microsect tragedy. I talk shit about the ISO a lot, and it's because I spent over a decade of my life in the ISO devoting, I don't know, a minimum of 10 hours a week to keeping that organization afloat and being on the Haymarket Books street team,
Well, yeah, that's why we're doing our penance. We've been doing our penance for the last 5+, I guess the last 6 years.
Haymarket Books is good, though.
Yeah,
and
of course.
It was,
I have some
good.
Haymarket Books, yeah.
I still buy Haymarket Books. And, but we really were like part of the multi-level marketing scheme that was the Haymarket Books street team.
The other MLM, which is also bad, but just
Yeah, of course, nothing good was we did what the ISO did. When we championed the death of the microsect, it's like when the ISO championed the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's like, oh, good, now the slate is clean and we can build real socialism. That's what we did when the microsect collapsed. We were like, oh, yeah, microsects are all dying, going away. Good riddance. Now we can have real socialist organization. Or we could just have, a lamer and dumber and worse version of the same exact thing that we just had.
Yeah.
It's really upsetting. A lot.
It's really upsetting to think back to how every year since the Second World War ended, we have just been cleaving off into smaller and more insignificant particles. The balkanization of the workers' movement is somehow seemingly never complete.
Nope. It can always get smaller.
I'm an international of one.
Well, also, if you really look at the closest thing we've had to any kind of regroupment was the DSA, which looked promising for a while until you realize that the DSA was not actually an organization of any kind. It's just like an umbrella that took your dues money in order to give to to give to progressive Democrats. I wish there was such a thing as a radical Democrat, like a radical Republican.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
don't know what a radical Democrat would look like. I guess a radical Democrat would be like the most annoying libs in the world online.
It might be worth just pointing out this disclaimer. When we're talking about radical Republicans, we're talking about people like John Fremont and Benjamin Wade and Thaddeus Stevens and Hannibal Hamlin and fucking like Ulysses S. Grant. You know, the people who made the Civil War a war to end slavery.
Yeah.
And not just a war to end the rebellion.
Yeah, and then radical Democrats are just the Democrats now, but the most annoying ones. At
best, you know, you have like Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, which makes me... Yeah.
Yeah, I guess. Is she the best?
Of the radical Democrats?
Yeah. Is she radical at all?
Well, I mean, no.
I was thinking that one, like whenever I say radical Democrats, I mean, I was just joking, but I was thinking like that one blue-haired lib from Twitter that, what was their name? Zini Jardine or whatever. That's who I was thinking of when I was thinking of radical Democrats as a joke.
So if the polls here are between Shulia Colfax on one side and this person on Twitter with blue hair on the other side, then
Zini Jardine.
Yeah, we're in really bad shape.
Her whole thing was just hot takes on Twitter that are like, but really just being like a Nancy Pelosi stan. Right. That's what I said when I said radical Democrat. It was very tongue in cheek. It was about like the most milquetoast fucking libs who posture as like radical fighters for women's equality and radical fighters for black liberation, but would never actually vote for anything that emancipated anyone.
Well, yeah, that's why there are terms like radical and left and even Marxist. Although I am at least willing to still be a proud defender of this concept, even if it's nowhere to be found. I still have a memory of, and I still have an aspiration toward and yearning for a clarification of a thing which we can call Marxism. But inasmuch as a Marxist is just this radical Democrat of the left and whatever, like I'm uninterested in taking back any of those terms. Like you can have all of those things, because I think we should be propagandists enough to utilize what moves people most. But what moves people to do the things which we actually think should be done, not just what moves people to do anything. Because I don't think we should just act. We should fucking talk. We should think, and we should reformat. And I have a feeling that if Ben and or Kevin were here, we have some pushback, and we would maybe even, I would welcome that pushback. Like, you know, Kevin is still the lone one of us who is still formally involved in a socialist organization.
Yeah.
Ben is still someone who will mark out a space for the left and being progressive and whatever. And I think that's valuable to have people like Ben and Kevin as representatives of, or as being mixed up in that in some way. But I'm just not willing to anymore.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, like, I don't think it matters if you are or aren't, right? We're two old white guys. We've been told. So I don't know how many times that you and I separately have been told, you know, to get out of the way, shut up. We need to talk less as old white guys. That's why when we talk, we just talk on our little podcast, and you have to go out of your way to hear us. You know, I'm not showing up to your DSA meeting and getting on the stack and taking up time on the floor and making everybody listen to me. Just here on my little podcast with a few thousand listeners, a few thousand more hate listeners.
Well, right. Like, I'm not super willing. I'm basically unwilling to talk about what organizing projects I may or may not be involved in on the podcast, because I think this is the wrong forum for that. I'm not interested in this being a forum for us to like pontificate about what it feels like and what personally I'm doing to feel better about whatever's happening in my immediate surroundings. I'm much more interested in talking about things in a way which maybe can be part of a conversation with other people trying to figure out these seemingly unsolvable problems.
Говорят, рабочие крестьяне не смогут развести нас. Без нас некому будет установить порядок, определить работу, тянуть труду. Без нас все развалится и государство распадется.